Hi, I'm Dr. Boyce Watkins at YourBlackWorld.com. Many of you saw this week on the site ReasoningForRhymes.com that Rick Ross, the boss, as he's known, is in some trouble with the Gangster Disciples. Apparently, there's some people that feel slighted within the organization. They feel that maybe Rick made a promise he did not keep, that he's pretending to be something that he's not, or whatever the case may be. But they've threatened him. They've told him he needs to cut a check, which means pay them money. And on one hand, it might seem like a simple extortion case where they just want money for nothing, but they're not doing this to anybody else. They're kind of picking on him, which tells me that there might be something more to it. So to kind of understand this, I wanted to speak to John Harris, who is a contributor at Reason for Rhymes, who is a self-designated hip hop head and who loves the hip hop music industry, and he has some perspectives on this issue that I think people should hear about. So how you doing today, John?
Oh, I'm doing wonderful.
Good. So I think everybody's doing better than Rick Ross. Even without the GDs, I mean, Rick got some health problems, man. He need to go to the gym, but he's got a lot of money, so maybe money can buy your way out of most situations, but probably not out of this one. Can you tell me, what your perception is of what's going on with the GDs, why they are coming after him the way they are, and why it seems that his life is being threatened? I mean, he's canceling concerts, and nobody's standing up for him. Even Lil Jojo, I think that was his name. Not Lil Jojo, I'm saying his name was Jojo. He's out of Chicago. He's, I guess, a liaison between the GDs and the music industry. And he said, "I'm not squashing shit." Like that. Those are literally his words when he made reference to this beef, because he feels that Ross. It seems that, from what I heard in the interview, he feels that Ross has done something unethical to deserve this. What is your take on this?
Well, from what it seems, in my opinion, it all boils down to one word, and that's integrity. And Rick Ross, as arguably good of a rapper as he is, very great at beat selection and putting together projects, he has not been able to put himself together well. He's used a facade. And with this facade, he's crossed a lot of boundaries. You know, you called out Larry Hoover in your BMF song, glorifying this gangster lifestyle, when Larry Hoover himself is trying to distance himself from that lifestyle. You know, he's promoting growth and development, not the Gangster Disciples, but you have someone like Rick Ross yelling "rah rah" with the Larry Hoover of the past and his actions of the past, and glorifying that instead of promoting what he's doing now. And even Rick Ross's very being is just totally opposite of what each person's agenda is. Same thing with Free Ricky Ross. I mean, he took this guy's name and is promoting his lifestyle. Even took the man's beard. I mean, Rick Ross, the rapper Rick Ross, didn't used to have a beard like that. You know, you can go back to Trina's video with him from the All About the Benjamin soundtrack. Rick Ross had a clean shaven face. You know, took this man's whole identity and promoting his lifestyle, and when Freeway Ricky Ross himself is not promoting that lifestyle. You know, it's like with him doing this, he's doing a lot more tearing down, not only of the people and of the listeners, especially the children, but he's also tearing down the efforts of these real people trying to make amends for the actions of the past.
Wow. So not only is he pulling up old stuff, I mean, it's kind of sad when you try to better yourself and somebody's celebrating the person you used to be and hyping that up as if that's the person that you still are. So not only is he celebrating who they used to be, but he's also not compensating them for using their names and their likenesses in order to make money. I mean, that's copyright infringement, basically. I mean, Rick Ross, we heard from Freeway Ricky Ross. You know, I hear from him about once a month, mostly through email now, but we did talk on the phone, and he was flabbergasted over the idea that somebody could literally just take your name and take the lifestyle that you you once had and use that to make millions of dollars and not feel obligated on any level to compensate you for utilizing your identity. This is what concerned me from the jump, that made me think, well, maybe this is something that where they're not just picking him out and going after him. Maybe there is some legitimacy behind this. How do you think this is going to end? I mean, as a person who has followed hip hop, I mean, you have been a hip hop head since before you were in your mama's womb. What based on what you know about the industry, and also you're not a you are a black man. You've lived the black male experience in a multitude of ways. Educationally, you graduated from college, but also you've confronted the worst that the streets have to offer, and then also being a part of the industry. What is your perception of how this is going to end and the direction this is going to go?
Well, it doesn't look very well as long as Rick Ross continues to hold this hard line that he has no claim to. It would be like, this all would have been ended a long time ago if Rick Ross would have just changed his name. He had already developed Ricky Rose. Go by Ricky Rose. Go by Rose. Just change your name out of respect. It's the thing called, it's integrity. You know what I'm saying? Regardless, above the money, it's just all about integrity. Just, change your name. And just as an artist, there's a lack of integrity amongst the artists where they're just pumping any kind of message out to the people, especially the kids. And for whatever reason, we as consumers, we eat that up. We eat that up. We expect that. We don't. That's what we want. You know what I'm saying? That's what they give us, and that's what they want. But they're feeding us poison. But we want the poison for whatever reason. People are their filter of information. They're having a hard time discerning just some rhymes with real life, and they're letting these fake, fabricated stories dictate what we do in our real life, and that's a problem. I don't understand where that comes from either. But Rick Ross himself is undermining a lot of positive efforts that people are trying to do, and along with that, he's crossed personal lines, like with the Gangsta Disciples by using the Star of David, even though the Star of David is an exclusive Gangsta Disciples, that's their symbol, but Rick Ross put his face over that Star of David in the midst of this confusion, in the midst of this disagreement, which is looked at by the Gangsta Disciples and people that support them as a slap in the face. He said Black Bar Mitzvah, but that's why Shine took offense. It's like Shine took offense from a religious aspect. Who are you to be speaking on something of a Jewish nature? You're not Jewish. That's why Shine took offense. He's just upsetting a lot of people. There are a lot of people, boundaries that are being crossed with this music and words that are really touching real personal areas, and it's dangerous. And when it's personal, anything can happen.
Well, I agree with you. Sometimes we think that having enough fame and money can protect you. That you're locked up in some big white corporation where they're taking good care of you, and you literally think that nobody can touch you, and that's a problem. Even JoJo made that point where he said that you can get to a point where even your security does not want to work for you anymore because your security needs security, and I think Rick might want to think about who he's disrespecting. I mean, because he wouldn't do that to Warner Brothers. He wouldn't, or whatever record label, funds him. I want to say it's Warner Brothers, maybe somebody else, I have no clue, or Universal Records. He wouldn't disrespect them this way without expecting a retaliation. So I don't know why he thinks he could do this to the Gangsta Disciples or anybody that he's done this to, and not expect that there might be consequences. So I hope it gets worked out. I don't want to see, the last thing I want to see is more violence in hip-hop. The last thing that I released, the last mini-book that we just put out is called Commercialized Hip-Hop and the Gospel of Self-Destruction. And, we talk about how some of these messages that you mentioned are literally destroying and killing young black men. There's almost nothing that young black men get from the radio every day that is going to lead them to a productive and positive life. And so when you have individuals like a Larry Hoover and a Rick Ross who look back and see the error of their ways and are trying to use their powers for good as opposed to evil, the last thing we need is some Negro who signed up for a minstrel show to go out here and promote the very worst in us as opposed to elevating the very best in us. So Rick needs to learn. You know, he needs to make amends and make this right, and then also think about the message he's putting out there. John, I'll let you get the last word. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and just your interest in all of this? You know, what drives your passion for hip hop?
Well, the thing about me and hip hop is, man, it's just like the first time I heard it, it's always been with me. I was listening to music before hip hop. You know, before there was hip hop, you know, I was listening to Stevie Wonder and Michael Jackson, Jackson 5, and, you know, Quincy Jones and, you know, artists like that. That's what Cameo, Funkadelic, Bernie Worrell. You know, I come from a very diversified musical background as far as listening. And my father was in the military, so I always moved around. So I was living in Texas when the Ghetto Boys came out and when Rap-A-Lot Records was first dropping. I was living in Texas, and I was living in Florida when Luke Records was first coming out and, you know, dropping with the 2 Live Crew and their landmark Supreme Court decision that they got, and, you know, promoting the parental advisory stickers. And I've lived through the NBA, the NWA, and the LA riots, and seen the precursor as well as the post destruction and also the post building from that. You know, and I've been an avid music listener through all of that, through hip hop. So it's like the stuff that's on the radio now that they say is vulgar. If you take NWA and play it next to what they call vulgar now, NWA almost sounds like a joke, you know, because even though they were labeling it vulgar, they were still telling the truth. You know, they were still telling the whole story. There may have been rhymes. They told the whole story from all the way around from start to finish. What these rappers are doing now, they're only telling a part of the story. They're not giving you the full picture, and it's leading that partial picture that they're putting out is misleading a lot of people. You know, NWA, whatever you got to say about them, Eazy, NWA, they still led and they were leaders. And a lot of these guys aren't really leaders, and they're leading a lot of people. They're misleading a lot of people into destruction, and it's a problem, and it is a problem.
Well, you know, I think it is a problem too. I agree with you. I think at the same time, though, you know, our generation has to take some responsibility for the fact that NWA started all this. You know, I think, what was it, MC Ren had that song where he said, I started this gangster shit, this is motherfucking thanks I get. I can't remember if it was him or Ice Cube or both. I guess they were both on the song. And it's like, you know, when you really look back, almost like a family tree and a lineage of gangster rap, which pretty much has taken over the industry. Hopefully it'll kind of die down and have a role, but not be the dominant force. But you can go back, you know, from the Rick Rosses and T.I.s and Lil Wayne, and go back to the 50 Cents and Eminems, and back to the Dr. Dre, Ice Cube, Snoop Dogg, etc. So you see where if NWA had not existed, then Rick Ross would probably not exist. You know, so I think NWA has that. I mean, honestly, especially if you compare it to what had been created before, there was a lot of messages in NWA's music that were not good. But at the same time, you know, if you go even deeper than that, we have to look at the socioeconomic conditions that created the message that they had, right? I mean, you know, L.A., these kids grew up in a war zone. You know, they had been decimated by drugs. Yeah, drugs and weapons and no jobs, everybody going to prison, getting hauled off by the busload. So, you know, to some extent, you know, art does imitate life. You look at Chief Keef, and this is what I have to remind myself. When I get angry at Chief Keef, you know, I have to remember Chief Keef grew up in a space where so many of our kids have no guidance. You know, so many of these kids have no parents. Their fathers are gone to, you know, doing 50-year prison sentences. So what can we expect other than what we're kind of getting? At the same time, there is a cleanup job to do, right? The chief keeps must be educated. When I talk, as much as I disagree sometimes with like Russell Simmons, when I talked to him the other day, I noticed his language when we talked about a project we're trying to do on mass incarceration. He kept talking about educating the artists, educating the entertainers, and I said, no, that's right. As a professor, I should know this first. That some of them have to just be educated on what their messages are doing to our kids, and then also at the same time, when you go back to the Chief Keef example, I see a cat that got. It's one thing if he's spitting a destructive message. It's another thing when Interscope Records comes along and gives him a couple $1 million to amplify that message. Why do we allow these corporations to give the biggest microphone to the most ignorant Negro in the room? Why is Trinidad James getting $2 million from Def Jam when you got other great artists out here like Jasiri X and others who can't who don't get the time of day from some of these record labels? So I think we have to really sort of approach it with compassion, but we have to be very firm about saying, if you're coming after our kids and you're trying to kill our kids psychologically, which is even worse than killing them physically, when you're killing our kids psychologically, we're going to kill you. Any good parent will kill to protect their children, and we have to be willing to go to the wall when it comes to dealing with these record labels and just making sure the message is balanced. I mean, the gangster story, that's part of the black experience, but that is not what a black man's all about. Like the comedian said, you don't wake up banging over bacon,
not at all.
That's not who we are, man. So that's my take. So John, I'll let you get the last word.
That's what comes in and tells the entire story, tells the whole story. And then you got to realize what people have accepted as gangster. You know what I'm saying? You got to understand that some of this gangsterism and posturism comes from these gangster movies or criminals, while other gangsters are formed out of necessity, out of revolution, and and what they've done is made the movie gangster, the studio gangster, the drug dealers, the Al Capones more prettier, more attractive, more alluring than to be a revolutionary gangster, to go against the grain, to stand your ground, to protect your own. And that, I think, is not by accident. They'd rather see us, dressed like Trinidad James and acting crazy than the message that maybe a KRS-One or Public Enemy used to put out. And even with Tupac didn't just show you anger. He showed you all the emotions of a human, from having fun to playful to teasing to anger to family to pride to, he ran the gamut. And it's like what they're doing is just taking a small slice of this black experience and pushing it to where it becomes marketed as the black experience. So we can't let our experience be told by anyone else. We really need to control our own stories and just tell the truth.
Well, I think you're absolutely correct. I think that's it. We just need to tell rappers stop lying and tell record labels we're not going to let you lie to promote lies about who we are anymore. The thing that made me angry is, John, man, when I went to Power 105 in New York City, and I was there to do a fatherhood panel, and I asked one of the hosts on the show, I said, what do you think about Trinidad James? And he said, oh, Trinidad, yeah, he was here yesterday. And I said, really? So what's he like? He said, oh, he's actually quite articulate and very intelligent, but he just doesn't portray that in his music. And that angers me because you hear that so often. I hear about all these damn artists who come out looking like puppets from the Muppet Show. That's how stupid and ridiculous they look. But yet, behind the scenes, they're very intelligent. So when did we decide that black men should be ashamed of being intelligent? When did we decide that? And that's something that should be unacceptable. It's one thing if you're ignorant. An ignorant person don't know they're ignorant, so you can't get mad at them, right? But a person who's intelligent, who dumbs himself down to fit in or to make a dollar, that person has very little value to our community. So we got to stamp it out where we can, man. So I appreciate your points on this, and I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for talking to me, John.
Thank you, boys, and I hope everybody out there, y'all tune in and check out reasonforrhymes.com.
All right. And thank you all for checking us out. And until we meet again, please stay strong, be blessed, and be educated. We are gone. Peace.